Okay. So, Parshas Shmini, this week's Parsha, we have the mitzvahs of kosher animals. What makes a animal kosher? Kosher meaning permissible to eat. So, there are for mammals two rules, two things, two signs that either illustrate or determine, that's a whole conversation for itself, whether an animal is kosher, whether we're allowed to eat an animal. And we know those two things are, it has to chew its cud, u'ma'alat gera. So ma'alas gera means literally that ma'alas gera, people translate as it chews its cud. It doesn't technically mean chews its cud. Ma'alas means it brings up, which means it regurgitates its food, which is what an animal does when it chews its cud. You could YouTube a camel or a deer or whatever chewing its cud, and you can see there are endless videos as there are of everything on YouTube of an animal. You see it chew, it swallow, and then, however long later, 10 seconds, whatever it is, you actually see the ball of food roll back up the throat. Camels are a good one because they have a long neck, it's easy to see. And then they start chewing again. So these animals are ruminants. They have a rumen, is one of the several stomachs that they have. We have one stomach. Kosher mammals have several different, well, they're not all called stomachs, each one has a different name, but because they're herbivores, they get pretty much all of their nutrition from grass, which we can't digest. The cellulose and all other whatever stuff that's going on that makes it difficult for us to digest. So they actually have multiple stomachs, multiple gastric chambers, and each one has a bit of a different function and different enzymes and whatever it is that allow it to break the grass down properly so that they can extract all the nutrients. So they chew, they swallow, it goes, into one compartment of their stomach and it gets processed a little, gets exposed to whatever it needs to be exposed to, it comes back up, they chew it and mix it all up and break it down again further, and that happens several times. So that's one of the signs of a kosher animal, is that it chews its cud. The second one is that it has split hooves, which obviously has two components. It has to have a hoof, and the hoof has to be split, and it has to be split all the way through. So, for example, horses have hoofs that they wear. A horseshoe gets nailed and or glued onto the bottom of the hoof, but the hoof of a horse is just continuous, which is why the horseshoe looks like that. That's if you're looking from the bottom. If you're looking from the front, I don't know, I can't draw, but it's just a continuous hoof. Sorry? From the bottom, if this is the front of the foot and you're looking up from the bottom and this is the rear, there's the foot, actual foot is here, and then on the bottom of the foot there's the hoof.
Oh, like the horseshoe, that's why they have that shape. It's kind of like hollow, and you said that's why they have to check their feet for those stones.
So I'm not sure that they're actually hollow, but stuff can make its way in and cause infections and get really nasty. But the hoof is one continuous, I'm assuming everyone here has seen a horse's foot, and the hoof, it's just one continuous, kind of like similar to nail. It's actually, what it's made out of is very similar to a nail, just a big nail. And kosher animals have a hoof, but it's split in two. And it has to be split all the way through. So these are the two things that make an animal kosher. It chews its cud and it has split hoofs. Now, the kosher status of food is obviously something that's extremely fundamental. Food is an enormous part of life. It's even more of a focus for us because of the fact that it has to be kosher. So anywhere a Jew goes, we come with bags and bags and bags of food. There's an expression people say that you are what you eat. And people treat it as though it's a figurative statement, but it's actually not. We literally are. Our body, the physical matter of our body, was sourced from food that we ate. Right? If you think about a newborn baby, an infant, a very, very young child, if you would weigh how much the baby weighs and then measure the weight or the mass of the food that they eat, the amount of food that they eat proportionally for their weight is enormous. And a big part of that is because they're growing at a very high rate. And if a baby is born at 7 pounds and a month later it weighs 8 pounds, there's a pound more of baby now. Where did that pound of baby come from? It was 7 pounds, now it's 8 pounds. There's more skin tissue than there was. There's more muscle tissue than there was. There's more bone tissue than there was. There's more, nerve and everything. Everything is, let's say, more or less, 12, 15% more, whatever it is. Where did all of that additional 15% of baby come from? It came from the food that the baby ate. Right? When we eat, we ingest food. Our body breaks down the food into nutrients. And for a baby like that, the food is really providing two things, and the baby needs a huge amount of both of them. One of them is energy, calories. Right? So some of the food is going to be broken down to release energy, to release calories that are stored in the food. And obviously, to be able to grow at that rate also burns a massive amount of energy. It's a huge amount of work, which is a big part of why they sleep so much also. That's when growth and development happens. And it's like a never-ending recovery for them because of the rate at which their body's growing. So they need a massive amount of calories. And in addition to some of the nutrients in the food being broken down to release calories, a lot of those nutrients are being used literally as building blocks to construct new body. New cells need to be made, the new cell membranes. There's a lot of fat is going to be taken from the food for the cell membranes and hormones and those sort of things that are all made out of fat, and for myelin for the nerves. And obviously a lot of protein is going to be involved in construction of new muscle tissue, I don't know, all tissue really, but the molecules, primarily the protein and the fat, are going to be used literally to construct new baby. These are the building blocks that a person is made out of.
New baby. Oh yeah.
What's your baby made out of?
Nice.
What's your baby built from?
Yeah.
Did you just say knives?
Nice.
Oh, I thought you said knives. I'm like,
She said nice.
Hashtag build a baby. Nice.
Okay, so, right. So when you say you are what you eat, it actually is literally true. Our bodies are literally physically constructed out of molecules that we obtained from food that we ingested. We literally are what we eat. Obviously, this is relevant to physical health, but obviously that what we eat is going to be a massive factor in how healthy we are. And incidentally, you know what the acronym, the Rosh Hashanah of Standard American Diet are? Potato chips, ice cream, and Big Macs will make anybody sad sooner or later.
but it's the happy meal.
Sorry?
But it's supposed to be the happy meal.
It's the tray meal.
It's the meal that might make you feel happy for the first 10 seconds while you bite the first bite.
The immediate gratification.
Yes, the fact is, and this is, by the way, a bit of a tangent, but it's so important. The impact of just eating of eating food where one of the primary things we consider is just, is this something that I should be eating or not? And it doesn't mean you can't have a few latkes and a donut on Pesach and whatever. I'm not saying that it has to be immaculate, but if a person's eating foods primarily that they're supposed to be eating, the impact on health is so underappreciated that, it's honestly, it's probably not an exaggeration to say that it's not, but it should be criminal. Anyways, so yes, we are what we eat, and there's a reason why what we eat makes a massive difference to how we feel, how we think, how we perform, and how long we live. The same way that that's true of the physical characteristics of the food, The exact same thing is true of the spiritual characteristics of the food that we eat. Right? Every single one of us is a composite of a physical body and a non-physical soul. For a physical entity and an entity, the soul does not physically exist. Right? There's a reason that we cannot see a soul. There's a reason we cannot see angels. It's not because they're invisible. It's because we see physical things and they don't physically exist. Air is invisible. Angels are not invisible. They don't physically exist. The soul doesn't physically exist. So the fact that a physical body and a non-physical soul are able to interact and come together as a composite entity shouldn't actually be possible. And it's something that Hashem does very much in a way of overriding the natures of the physical and the non-physical. And we actually refer to this every time we say the bracha asher yatzar. At the end we say, Rofer chol basar, he who heals all flesh, or mafli la'asos, and does wonders. One of the wonders that it's referring to is the wonder of creating a composite entity that by definition depends on both a physical and a non-physical component, because if either one of those is missing, there's no person. So the same, now that is complex and difficult enough as it is. If a body is going to be literally constructed out of materials, built out of molecules, that were sourced from food that is, let's say, spiritually inappropriate for that body and doesn't match with the soul that's trying to interact with that body, it's going to interfere with the soul's ability to express itself in and through that body and to interact in an ideal way. Question?
Yeah, just that even though the soul isn't like physical in the sense that we believe, like we understand physicality, but it somehow does exist in physical reality, or else how would it be able to like exist and express itself here in the physical world? Like, not to be that person, but
One person, no.
like,
I mean,
like to go against what you're saying, but it's like, I don't know, like I've seen the point of death. Like I watched like my grandfather pass away, and like there is a physical component to the soul. Like you can tell, like you can see something that it's like that's not a person anymore. Like that's not an neshama anymore. And it's like somehow it physically exists, but not like in physical reality. Even the spiritual worlds somehow blend into a physical reality at some point in the infinite levels of the tzimtzum that Hashem's
okay.
manifesting himself here.
At the risk of also being that person, I would say that, I mean, maybe it's a matter of semantics. The way that I would word it probably is that the soul doesn't physically exist, but because Hashem has given it the ability to interact with and become a composite partner with the body, so it has a very, very real impact on the behavior and experience of and functioning of the body. And perhaps what we're seeing is the change the change in the impact on the body when the soul departs, rather than actually seeing the departure of the soul itself. I think that's probably a more accurate way of describing it, I think. But either way, but the point ultimately is this. I mean, it's not necessarily the same if we're getting into the nitty-gritty of that specifically, but there's no question that the impact of the soul and of everything non-physical, of angels, of all of it, on the physical reality and the physical experience is absolutely very real. There's no question about that. And even if you want to say that they exist within the realm of the real, for example, when the angels came to visit Avraham Avinu, right? So the angels came to visit him, he saw the angels. Now, if he saw them with his physical eyes, that means there was some sort of physical expression of their existence. At the same time, when he fed them, the Medrash says that they didn't actually eat. They made it appear as though they ate. Why didn't they eat? Because they can't eat. They don't actually have a gastrointestinal tract. They can't ingest and digest food. They made it appear as though they ate because they're not actually physical entities. So does that mean that it appeared as though he saw them, and so in his experience he saw them, but what happened wasn't actually a reflection of physical electromagnetic radiation off of their physical bodies? It was more just he had this experience of seeing them, and they were present, and he perceived them, and he perceived it as being silent. I don't know, we could speculate endlessly, right? But there definitely is a very interesting, complex, mixture over here of them not being physical, but also being experienced by the physical within the realm of the physical, like you're saying. So, exactly how we would precisely, technically describe the mechanics of that, is perhaps up for, it's definitely, everything's up for discussion. But, so, the impact of the food we eat, and this is why in Hasidic culture and lifestyle, being one of the things that Hasidim have always, for many generations, for hundreds of years, been known to be very particular about and very much mahader in, is the kashrus of food. Because, the same way that, it's interesting, it just popped into my mind now as a metaphor or analogy, the people who are the most obsessed about the performance of their computers, and they're like opening up their computer to like dust it off every 2 hours and to make sure, checking the temperature, and they have water cooling for their computers and all of these things, is who? Gamers. People who play games. Because for them, if God forbid they drop, 1 out of the 120 frames per second, and they can't even tell, but their computer gives them a report at the end of the day that they dropped a frame, it's going to be catastrophic. Or, obviously I'm, having a go at it. But the fact is that the experience of a game, the higher the resolution, the more immersive the experience it is. The higher the frequency of the image change on the screen, the bit more realistic the experience is going to be. So gamers, there's nothing outside of gaming that has that sort of impact on the quality of what you see, and so they're obsessed about they're obsessed about their hardware. 99% of people, at minimum, buy a computer. They use their computer. When their computer freezes or crashes or dies, they ask a friend, what computer should I buy next? Or they ask someone to repair it, and that's it. And then you have, maybe people who are content creators and video editors and stuff like that. And then, a little bit more particular about their hardware. And then you have gamers who like every single detail they need to know. Why? Because what they are trying to get out of their computer depends on maximum performance, and they know that, and they want maximum performance, and performance depends on, number one, the physical hardware, number two, the condition in which it is kept and the condition in which it's operating. And because the absolute maximum performance is so important to them, so they, take their hardware and maintenance of their computers extremely seriously. If someone sees their whole life as being about the maximum expression of the soul in the world, the maximum impact of the soul in the world, which depends obviously on the extent to which their soul is effectively interacting with and expressing itself through their body, if that's their number one priority in life, and the spiritual, let's say, health of the body, the spiritual composition of the body, is going to have a very real impact on the soul's ability to integrate and express itself through that body, then they are going to take the particulars of the food they eat, and out of which their body is going to be literally constructed, they're going to take that very seriously. And this is ultimately a very large part of what Chassidus is about, is giving us the understanding, the insight, the clarity, so that we do perceive the world this way, and so that our primary interest is to allow our souls to express themselves to the maximum degree possible and to have the maximum possible impact on the world and to integrate the maximum divinity and godliness into the world through this process and these behaviors. And if that's what it's all about, then the conduciveness of our body to allow the soul to express itself through our body is going to be utmost priority. And so Chassidim for centuries have really taken kashrus very, very, very seriously and been like super particular about it, more so than almost anything else. Question?
No, I was just going to say, so like gamers are at heart like the ultimate kind of Chassidim.
I'm going to have to say no on that, and then I'll figure out why. What I would say is that in terms of, there's no question that gamers are the people who take their computers the most seriously and the performance and achievement of their computers the most seriously. And Chassidim, in terms of the impact, in terms of integration of divinity into the world, we take that with the utmost seriousness and maximum possible priority. So I would say that maybe what you could say is that gamers are the Chassidim of the desktop computer world, the equivalent in terms of wanting maximum possible performance, maximum possible output, maximum possible quality of impact, and therefore prioritizing the hardware and the condition in which it's in to such a high degree. So that's one thing here. Now, if we're going to look at what are the indicators, or again, we could call them indicators or the determining factors, and that's a very big conversation and debate, about whether chewing its cud and having split hooves actually makes the animal be kosher. When the Torah tells us that you can eat a mammal that has split hooves and chews its cud, you're allowed to eat. Is it saying that chewing its cud and having split hooves makes the animal kosher? Or is it saying that Hashem has set things up in a way that animals that are kosher chew their cud and have split hooves? So these are metrics by which we can determine whether or not an animal is kosher. And there are some technical differences, super niche, very specific. Very rarely is there going to be any difference. But this is a halachic conversation that has a real impact. It's not just theoretical, hypothetical, or conceptual. But keeping in mind that these are the things, these two factors are they which either determine or indicate that an animal is kosher, and that we understand that that determines whether or not this animal is going to be appropriate for us to ingest, consume, and construct our bodies out of, then what that tells us is that body, a spiritually well-tuned body, a spiritually healthy body for a Jew, is going to be one that is, well, let's start with step number one. A spiritually healthy and fine-tuned or in-touch body is going to be one that is constructed out of molecules that came from an animal that has these two things, which tells us that these two things are correlated with a body that is spiritually healthy and in touch and fine-tuned. The question then becomes, can we understand what would be the equivalent idea of chewing cud and having split hooves? And can we then look to apply those behaviors or emulate those behaviors in our own lives and then be increasing the idea of split hooves and chewing cud even more, which is going to further the extent to which our body is spiritually healthy and fine-tuned and able to have the maximum possible integration of the soul and expression of the soul through it, and impact of the soul on the world through it. Right? So the question is, if chewing cud and split hooves are associated with the body, the maximum spiritual capacity, perhaps, of the body, then what do they represent for us behaviorally, and how can we integrate or apply these behaviors so that we can maximize the spiritual capacity of our bodies? So let's start with split hooves. And what we're going to say about split hooves is, I mean, it's like I said before, there's the hooves and the fact that they're split, it's both. And horses have hoofs, but they're not split. It has to be a hoof and it has to be split. Now, when we're going to talk about the analogy or the thing that this represents, what this is a metaphor for, we're going to be talking about two things that, in a sense, represent diametric opposites. But the coming together of these two diametric opposites in the right balance represents something that, is very easy to look past. A lot of times we'll take an idea and talk about it and the meaning and the lesson. And then sometimes, someone will ask at the end of the conversation and say, but what about this? And what about, if this is in a particular context or in this situation, or, if we just focus on that and ignore the other side of the coin, then maybe things aren't good either. And the fact is that that's true almost all of the time of almost most things, of almost everything, which is most things. Any idea that we discuss conceptually in isolation, we talk about that idea, we discuss it, we explain it, and it's a very effective and appropriate way to discuss things, is to take an idea and discuss it in isolation so you can understand everything that you can understand about it. Then it's also important to understand that when you take this concept and look at how it exists in reality, in the world, in the human experience, whatever it is, depending on the idea that we're talking about, nothing, no concept, no phenomenon, no idea, no thing exists in isolation. Everything is interacting with countless, literally countless other things. Every factor is interacting with countless other factors. And generally, there are going to be opposing factors that are in tension with each other. And the question is, if you want to discuss it in reality, what's the right balance? And you could pick either one of these two things and discuss them on their own. And when it comes to this, we'll hopefully break this down and you'll see what I'm getting at. But the hoof and the fact that the hoof is split are two different things, and we can and do very often discuss each of them in isolation as its own thing. And this is where we see that neither of them on its own is actually the way it's supposed to be. When we discuss each one, we talk about why you have to have a hoof as opposed to not having a hoof, and why there has to be a split as opposed to not having a split. But either one without the other is going to be missing a very important part of the picture. So what is a hoof? What is the function of a hoof? The function of a hoof is basically to protect the foot. The hoof is a very dense, hard, physical barrier between the foot of the animal and the ground that it walks on. Why? To protect against stones and pebbles, etc., all these things. Nails, whatever it is. And what this represents for us is the fact that it is very, very important that we have very clear and strong boundaries in place that govern and protect us against the impact of the world. And I think it's something that it's easier to appreciate, it's easier for more people to appreciate today. Not so long ago, people might have said, well, what do you have to be so scared of the world for? Now, I don't think anybody's making that mistake. You cannot survive very long at all, probably at all, certainly not in a state of good health, physical, mental, and emotional, if you just interact with the world that we exist in now without some very specific boundaries. Things that govern which part of the world you do allow into your life and which you don't, which ones you keep at a distance. right? So the fact is that the world's got a whole lot in it, a whole lot that's going on, and a lot of it, if we just allow it into our lives ungoverned, if we allow it even to contact our lives ungoverned, the outcome's not going to be good. Let's put it that way. And so we have to be very consciously aware of the fact that the world as it is and as it operates at face value has very different values and different function to our own. And it's imperative that we have boundaries that allow us to remain clear and strong on what our function is, what our purpose is, why we're here, what it's about, what works and doesn't work. And that we don't allow the values of the world around us certainly to enter our lives, and that we are very, very careful about which parts of the world, period, we allow into our lives. That being said, if we were to exist here in this world and lock ourselves up in a shul somewhere and just meditate and pray and daven, study Torah day and night, and that's all we did, there'd be no point in the world existing, and there'd be no point in us having been born. Like, if Hashem just wanted meditation and prayer and spirituality, Hashem would have created the angels and never bothered with this physical reality and everything that goes on in it, and he wouldn't have bothered with physical people, with Homo sapiens animal, and all the things that come along with that, and then taken this, spark of divinity and put it inside this animal and made them come together into this complex, difficult to maintain, not difficult for Hashem obviously, but conceptually difficult to maintain, composite entity. If Hashem did that, there's a really good reason. He had to have been really motivated to. He had to have really wanted what this offers. And what this offers is exactly that. It offers something that is not natural. It's not physically natural and it's not spiritually natural. And that is the integration of the spirit of divinity, of godliness, of God's infinity into the material, into the physical. That's the whole point of it all. And if we just isolate and meditate, study, pray, we're not interacting with the world. We're interacting with the world to a very minimal degree. And we are going to be integrating divinity into the world to a very, very minimal degree. And so the reason that the hoof of a horse does not make it kosher, but the hoof of a cow or a sheep or a goat does make it kosher, is because the horse has a continuous layer of protection that has no openings. Nothing comes up, nothing goes down. And, and there is sort of a mentality in, let's say, some parts of the Orthodox Jewish world that has something like this, and it makes a lot of sense. It's based in things that are very real. And this is a conversation I've had to have with people, when traveling and I meet people and talk to them. And a lot of times they're like, any experience I have of people who look like you is people who isolate themselves from the world and they don't want to talk to me. And even if they know I'm Jewish, they're not interested in talking to me, etc. And, I'll take the time and obviously expressing the fact that I understand exactly why that's hurtful to them and it's disturbing and it's, created some tension in their relationship with, Torah observant Judaism. But if we talk about it and understand where they're coming from, it is understandable. These people have values that are very important to them. These are values that have kept their family alive and consistent through 3,500 years of its lineage. And the fact is, the reality is, it's very vulnerable. Especially if one has, young children, teenage children, younger children, and they are allow them to be exposed to these things. It can make it, the world has temptations that anybody who's not religious would want to avoid if they have their head on straight. If we are trying to continue and perpetuate these values and the things that we believe in and that our family, our lineage has lived true to and believed in and maintained and kept alive for nearly 4 millennia, you can understand why they're scared of allowing anything that is not part of this into their lives. Wanting to have that hoof, that separation between oneself and the world around them is understandable. It's coming from a good place. The intentions are positive. And in part, it actually is a positive and a very necessary thing. The thing that is missing is the split in the hoof. There has to be a hoof. If there's no hoof, that foot's going to get decimated the first time it steps on the gravel. But the hoof has to be split. If the hoof is not split, it's not kosher. If we have a complete and total separation between us and the world around us, and there is no opening for some well and effectively managed and governed interaction that allows us to integrate divinity into the world because we do interact with it, then we might as well not be here. There's no point. Okay, that was, obviously rhetorical and a little bit over the top. I'm not saying that someone who just learns Torah and davens and never interacts with the world around them, there's no point in their life. Torah and davening and praying are extraordinarily valuable, obviously. And every community must have some people who live that way so that there are people who are specialists in that and then, can be a source of guidance, etc. But if everybody's doing that, and then there's almost no integration of divinity into the world because there's no interaction with the world, we could have been angels. Angels can pray and study Torah too. In fact, they do. That's why when Moshe went to get the Torah, they fought with him. They didn't want him to take it away. So these two things, and this is what I was getting at when there are two opposites, and we can discuss either one in isolation. We can talk about the importance of having protections and boundaries and very firm, hard boundaries between ourselves and the world in which we live. And that could be a conversation for itself. And in a sense, it needs to be a conversation in itself. Then there also needs to be a conversation about the importance of integrating divinity into the world, integrating the infinity of the Creator into the world, which we can only do by interacting with the world, or which we can do to a far greater extent if we interact with the world. And that completely isolating ourselves from the world is missing the point in a very large way. That has to be its own conversation. And by discussing each one in isolation, we can get into the details and the mechanics and all the different things that are part of each conversation. Then at the end, the bow on the top of both of them is that neither one of these is the full picture. The full picture is very strong, clear boundaries and protections between us and the world that are designed in a way that they allow a highly protected interaction with the world, i.e. a hoof that is split, that has an opening that allows transmission through it. And that's what makes an animal kosher. Right now, these signs are not signs of the soul, they're signs of the animal, right? These are the signs that determine if an animal's kosher. Within ourselves, the soul itself doesn't need any boundaries. The soul is going to be fine. But it's the body, primarily, it's the body-soul composite, primarily due to the body and the body's behavior, the human experience, the Homo sapiens component of who we are, the human-animal component of who we are, that's where this needs to be applied. If we want our body, the animal component of us, to be kosher, to be as receptive to spirituality and to allow the maximum expression of the soul through it and integration of divinity into the world by the soul through the body, it has to have split hoofs, which means it has to be protected from the world, but in a way that does allow interaction. And there's no limit on the amount of interaction necessarily. For different people, the ideal amount of interaction is very different. A person can, be out in business and socializing, and there are people I know who are very successful in business. People I know who are very, you could say very sort of, successful socially. And there are people that they're able to reach and things that they're able to achieve because of that no one who looks like me and has the title rabbi could ever achieve. ever. So there is an important part of that. It's not about how much interaction, it's about that the interaction is very highly governed and protected, and that all of that interaction is going through the intentional opening in the hoof. For someone to be able to do that, because, being isolated from the world kind of defeats the purpose of creation of the world. But if a person says, yes, I need to go out and interact with the world and interact with people and, and bring godliness everywhere and forget about how important it is to be careful, it's very easy to quite quickly go completely lose the plot and end up, doing things that started out with the right intention but are so far off course that they're going completely against what the intention was in the first place. So neither of these things is on its own works. If someone says, I have the potential and capacity and connections to do really well in business and to reach people no one else can reach, so I'm going to go in business and really make it to the top so I can do these things, and then forgets about the fact that the reason that they're there is for this intent, and that their values, etc., require that they have very strong boundaries and protection in place, and they don't have those things in place. It's not too hard to imagine that going, awfully awry very quickly. So both of those things, neither one without the other, is gonna be effective at all, at least in the bigger picture in the long term. It has to be both, and they are opposite in a degree, and that's why there is the hoof that is split. Unsplit hoof, not kosher. Lack of hoof, not kosher. There has to be a hoof and it has to be split, because there must be both of them at the same time. And when it comes to chewing our cud, what this represents is, and again, this is something that's primarily for the animal within us, the body, the human animal component, is, right, what's food? Food is that which we ingest, and then our body uses it as a source of energy, to build tissue, etc. What that would be, in a figurative sense, is ideas, plans, things that we learn about, things that we think about, and then based on that, that's going to inform our perspective, and it's going to inform our behaviors and our emotions and all of these things. When it comes to any idea that is going to impact our perspective, impact our emotions, impact our behavior, there are a lot of things that seem like a good idea at first glance, and maybe even second glance. And that's why they chew their cud several times. To think, and there's the expression, to chew it over. To chew over an idea. What's chewing? Chewing is breaking something down into little pieces, into the smallest pieces possible, so that it can be digested. Chew it over, take the idea, really think about it. Think about it seriously, give it serious long-term thought and repeated thought. Think about it, sleep on it. Right? When we sleep on an idea, again, that's an expression that is a very, very meaningful one. It's not just a random choice of words to express an idea. Sleep is when our brains organize and clarify and sort ideas and information, etc. And a lot of times something can seem like a good idea, and after, first of all, some time away, and second of all, some sleep and some processing and some clarity, we can see things from a whole different view. And it's important, before any time that we're thinking of something, it's not like there's a rule that if you ever hear a piece of information that doesn't come from Torah, it's bad or false. Obviously not. That would be absurd. But if we hear something, it's important, especially if it's something that we're going to be, that's going to be contributing towards our perspective or our emotions or our behavior. It's very, very important that we think about it, and we think about it again. We chew it, swallow it, add some additional enzymes, bring it back up and chew it and mix it up and break it down a little bit more. Swallow it again, take a break, let it come back up after some time out of the mouth, chew it over again. Think about it again and again, and take it very, very seriously, because sometimes things seem like a good idea, and it takes some time away and some serious consideration to realize that they're not. And you know what? Sometimes things seem like a good idea and we do everything we can and it still seems like a good idea, and it just takes experience, the wisdom of experience, to learn that it's not. And you know what? That's part of what we're here for. So have a good week.